I told you, I'm not trying to steal your damn crystals. The man hissed the words through clenched teeth, his shoulders bunched as he stood in the corridor's half-light. His name was Roven, a salvage pilot by trade, though it often felt more like a last resort than a career. He was backed against the cold metal wall of an abandoned terramite shipping station, a piece of derelict architecture that still clung in orbit above a swirling gray planet below. Torn wires hung overhead, lighting flickered, and the stale air smelled of rust and desperation. He held his pulse pistol in a tremulous grip, prepared to defend himself, though every instinct told him he was outmatched. Across from him stood a lithe, vivid-hued figure, her shimmering skin capturing what little light remained in the flickering hallway. Her eyes glowed with barely restrained fury, her stance powerful and unyielding. The alien woman's voice was low. "You snuck aboard my vessel. You rummaged through my hold." Her dialect wrapped each word in a thick accent, as if every syllable cost her breath. Curved ridges flared along her neck, faintly pulsing with bioluminescent lines that wove up toward the back of her skull. "I do not appreciate strangers who dig through my private materials." Her species was unknown to him. He'd never seen that combination of faintly scaled limbs, elongated fingers, or that nearly neon webbing that trailed from her wrists like translucent fins. Yet more than appearance, it was her manner that commanded his attention, a steely, unapologetic composure. She looked lethal, a predator in a fragile salvage corridor. Roven tried for a grin. It likely showed more fear than charm, but it was all he had. "Look, I got stranded here. My ship got clipped by an asteroid chunk. I bailed out in a life pod, landed in your docking bay. I wasn't trying to steal from you, just needed a place to breathe." The station lights flickered above them again, revealing that she wore only a minimal band of cloth across her chest and hips, with open slits to accommodate the luminous fins. He tried not to stare. But she was so unusual. Tall, wiry, and alarmingly beautiful in that dangerous, alien way. She looked him over just as boldly, her luminous eyes fixed on the pistol in his shaking hand. He swallowed hard. "If you want me to put this down, just promise not to break my skull." Her lips curled in a slight smirk. "You survived this station's outer ring, so I imagine you're not entirely helpless. But your weapon is unnecessary if you come in peace." She eased forward, showing no sign of intimidation by the pistol's trembling muzzle. Roven's breathing grew shallow as she drew near. The corridor's failing ventilation made the air thick, humid. Her gaze flicked to the sweat beading on his brow, the ragged tear in his jacket. He smelled the faint aroma of the station's stale air clinging to her, but also a sharper, more electric scent he couldn't place. "Your heart races," she murmured, eyes half-lidded. "But you say you're not a thief. Then explain how I find you rifling through my cargo." Roven cleared his throat. "I was looking for a calm link to contact my crew." That wasn't entirely untrue, but he had also been rummaging, hoping to find some salvage that might buy him passage off this ghost station. "If you have a comm device, maybe we can reach my people. I'm just a pilot, I don't mean any harm." For emphasis, he lowered his pistol, though he didn't holster it. "What's your name?" She regarded him coolly, as if deciding how much of herself to reveal. "Velixa." Then she stared at him a moment longer, the luminous lines along her arms pulsing in time with a hidden heartbeat. "Your wound is bleeding. You should see to it." She pointed at the gash on his forearm, a slow trickle of blood weaving down toward his wrist. In the scuffle earlier, he hadn't even noticed that a shard of jagged plating had cut into his skin. Pain flared as he registered it. "Are all humans so careless with their fragile flesh?" she asked, her voice a playful chide. He couldn't help a low chuckle despite the tension. "Only when we're panicking." He pressed his sleeve against the wound, stanching the flow. "So, Velixa, you the only one on this station, or do I need to watch out for the rest of your crew?" Her eyes flicked away, something like sorrow flickering across her features. "I'm alone." That was all she volunteered, but her tone carried a note of regret. "I've been searching for supplies. My ship's cooling systems are failing. My biology requires frequent cooldown, or I risk overheating." She inhaled slowly, and Rovan noticed how her gill-like fins fluttered. Your species manages temperature through sweat. Mine needs direct conduction with a cooler surface. Physical contact. She paused, scanning his reaction. Clothes interfere, slow me down. Heat can become lethal for me unless I can exchange it with something, or someone, colder. Rovan's eyebrows lifted. That's why you're wearing so little. It wasn't lost on him that she practically glistened in the corridor's flicker, her sleek scales and glowing membranes on full display. A fresh trickle of sweat slid from his temple, and he was sure she was noticing it. So you're, what, forced to remain half-naked to survive? Her jaw tightened. It is not typical for me to wander around an outpost like this, but circumstances force my hand. My last coolant packs were damaged when I took fire from passing raiders. Now, every so often, I have to seek direct contact with something cooler than my body. The bare metal of corridors helps only a little. Another living being can share the burden more effectively. The words were pragmatic, but her eyes glistened with something closer to tension, perhaps shame or discomfort at the necessity. Your presence might be more beneficial to me than I realized, if you are willing to help. He swallowed again, the heat rising in his cheeks. The idea that her survival depended on physical closeness made his heart pound in equal parts dread and fascination. Sure, if that's what you need. At least until we figure out a better option. Very well, she said softly, stepping closer, and Rovan felt her body heat radiating from just inches away. But only when absolutely necessary. I understand humans can be shy. He grunted, trying to act unaffected even though his pulse hammered in his neck. I can handle it. He forced his voice steady. But first, we should figure out if the station's comm console still works. There's a control hub down the corridor. We'll have to navigate some sealed bulkheads to get there, but I think the local grid might have enough power left for a short-range broadcast. Velixa inclined her head. Then let's go. We can settle trust issues along the way. If you keep your word about not stealing from me, I'll not snap your bones in half. He tried to summon a smirk. Deal. He still found it unsettling that she was so quick to mention physical harm, but given her toned body and lethal grace, he believed her capable of it. He led her down the corridor, mindful of the loose wiring and half-collapsed plating overhead. Each step echoed in the gloom, accompanied by the hiss of the station's life support system on its last legs. He noticed how she moved in near silence, her fins shimmering with each flicker of overhead light. They soon reached a locked hatch. Rovan pried open a panel and bypassed the manual release. The door groaned, revealing a darkened interior, rusty catwalks, crates strewn about, and more flickering lights that barely provided enough glow to see. He stepped in, carefully scanning for threats. Slavers sometimes used old stations like these as traps, lying in wait for unsuspecting travelers. But it seemed deserted. Velix's voice was low behind him. Your arm is still bleeding. He glanced at it. I'll bandage it once we're somewhere safer. I'm not sure if anything in this place is still functional. For all I know, the med bay is gone. Or full of hungry vermin. She laid a hand gently on his shoulder, surprising him with the warmth of her skin. Or was it the other way around? Did he feel her heat, or did he sense the shimmering coolness she needed? The sensations mingled confusingly. If you pass out from blood loss, you'll be of no use to anyone. She tore a strip of cloth from the lower edge of her minimal covering, revealing yet more shimmering skin. Wrapping it firmly around his arm, she secured it with a deft knot. He stared, stunned not only by her directness but by how close she was, how her exotic scent curled through his senses. Better, she murmured, meeting his gaze. He cleared his throat, trying to ignore the sudden dryness in his mouth. Thanks. The corridor behind them crackled with an electrical short, and they both whirled, pulse pounding. Darkness pressed in. Rovan quickly pushed forward into the next room, motioning for Velixa to follow. They took the winding corridor that sloped downward. Each door they passed was sealed or unpowered, and occasionally they heard distant groans of stressed metal. They finally reached what might have once been the command center. The door was blasted off its hinges, lying in twisted metal on the deck. The room inside was in shambles. A row of flickering monitors lined one wall, some still functional. Rovan let out a soft exhale, his eyes scanning the battered terminals. If anything was still working, maybe they had a chance. He moved to the largest console and tried powering it. A faint hum rewarded him, and a screen sputtered to life, half the pixels dead. "All right," he whispered. "We might be able to send out a signal." Velixa remained near the door, scanning the darkness. Her fins flared, a sign of heightened alert, or maybe just the station's dryness affecting her. "I sense something else here," she said. "I can't explain it, but I feel we're not entirely alone." "Does your species not sense subtle vibrations?" Rovan paused, hand on the console. "We're not that special, biologically speaking. We can pick up on footsteps, maybe, but that's about it." He typed a quick sequence on the battered input pad, searching for power routes that would let the transmitter function. The system spat out error codes, but he found a partial path to the station's outer antenna. "Might be enough for a short ping. Give me a minute." Velixa glided closer, leaning over the console, her luminous lines reflecting off the cracked screen. Despite the tension, Rovan felt a tingle at her nearness. He'd encountered many alien species out on the fringe of settled space, but she was different in a way that made him acutely aware of his own heartbeat. He did his best to focus on the console. "I'm inputting my salvage ID. That might get the attention of any passing terramite or human vessel." He tapped the last command, then waited. The console word spat out a bit of static from the overhead speaker. "We'll see if we get a response," he said. "But it might take a while." Velixa nodded, her gaze shifting to a half-buried cargo crate. She popped it open with surprising strength, rummaging inside. "These look like old ration packets. If we're stuck here, might as well see if any are edible." She tossed him one. It landed near his feet with a dull clack. "I don't need as much solid food as humans, but I need hydration. And cold surfaces." She said the last part wryly, her eyes flicking to the wall. She pressed a hand to the metal plating. "It's only a temporary relief." Rovan swallowed as he realized a more permanent solution was standing right there. The thought of sharing that kind of contact with her made him uneasy and curiously eager in the same breath. "We'll figure something out," he said a bit gruffly. "Maybe the med bay's coolant system is still operational, or we can salvage a portable cooler for you." She gave him an assessing look. "If we can't find anything mechanical, we'll improvise." Then her eyes softened. "I don't want to force your cooperation. But if it comes down to my survival, I may not have the luxury of modesty." He blew out a breath, forcing a grin. "We're stuck in a dead station with no sure way out. Might as well team up." He paused, scanning the battered console. "Let's hole up somewhere less exposed while we wait for a response." He glanced around, noticing a corridor leading deeper into the station, presumably to living quarters. "We can check out that area, see if any of the bunks are still intact." Velixa inclined her head and followed him. They picked their way down the corridor, stepping over debris and broken metal. The overhead lights grew dimmer, some flickering so feebly they cast the hall in a stuttering half-dark. Twice, Velixa paused, her fins trembling. "We're definitely not alone," she murmured. "Something is moving out there, deeper in the station." Rovan's stomach clenched. "Could be feral scavengers, or even leftover security drones. Or worse, slavers." He tried to steady his pistol hand. The idea of meeting more trouble in such compromised conditions didn't thrill him. They approached what looked like a row of crew quarters. The first door was jammed, so Rovan forced it open with a heavy boot. Inside were 2 bunks, a battered table, and a couple of chairs. The flickering overhead fixture gave just enough light to see dust floating in the stale air. "Might be safer to barricade in here for the moment," he said. Velixa stepped inside warily, scanning corners with sharp eyes. Then she turned to him. "You're overheating." She pointed to his sweat-soaked collar. "Your body is working to cool itself. Perhaps you can spare some of that precious cool sweat for me." His cheeks burned again, a mixture of embarrassment and an uninvited ripple of desire. That's a weird way to put it. Is it? She asked with a small, wry smile. How is my bodily requirement any less awkward than your own? My species simply needs to exchange heat differently. She folded her arms, but that only served to highlight the mesmerizing swirl of scales along her biceps. If it helps you to think of it as a biological handshake, so be it. He let out a nervous laugh, closing the door behind them. When you say contact, how direct are we talking? She tilted her head, eyes flicking over his form. Skin to skin is fastest. Clothing layers interfere. I can release excess heat by conduction, but it requires direct closeness. You would not be harmed. I promise I can regulate the rate. You'll feel warm, but not scalded. He licked his lips, stepping away from the door. So you, basically need me to hold you? The moment he said it, his pulse spiked, and he hoped she didn't notice his sweaty palms. Look, I don't want you to die from heat exhaustion, but this is a little personal, you know? Her expression softened, and for the first time he saw vulnerability. My people place great importance on physical boundaries. We do not share conduction lightly. But out here, in this desolate place, I have little choice. She took a halting step closer. I can sense your nerves. You have my word I will not harm you. And it might keep me alive. He studied her, heart hammering. She was right. He was overheated. The station's environmental controls were failing, the air was thick with humidity. She, on the other hand, seemed to run even hotter. Fine, he murmured, trying to keep his voice calm. Just, no sudden moves, okay? She closed the last bit of distance. Gently, she reached up and touched his cheek with the tips of her elongated fingers. Her skin felt hot, almost feverish, but not unbearably so. Carefully, she slid closer, pressing her torso to his. He felt the softness of her minimal clothing, the slick warmth of her scales, and the ridges that formed across her shoulders. She exhaled, and the fins at her wrists shimmered, releasing a faint glow that played across both of them. He stood there, stiff, uncertain if he should encircle her with his arms or remain still. The tension in the moment was as thick as the station air. She made a small sound, half sigh, half relief. Better. Her cheek pressed lightly to his chest. I can feel the heat flowing out of me. Be still. He swallowed, forcing himself to relax. She slid her arms around his waist carefully, as if worried he might spook. The contact was intense, a foreign closeness to a being he just met under suspicious circumstances. But as the seconds ticked by, he felt a slight shift in temperature between them, as if her overheated body was slowly equalizing with his. His breath caught at the press of her skin. The dryness in his throat grew more pronounced. Something about the precarious nature of the station, their forced proximity, the uncertainty of survival, it all coalesced into a swirl of conflicting emotions. He dared to lower his arms and rest them around her back. He felt the flex of her muscles, the subtle shift of the scales. She sighed softly, eyes closed, and for a moment they were just two living creatures sharing a moment of necessary contact. At length she pulled back with a trembling exhale, luminous eyes flicking up to his. Thank you, she whispered. I can go a while longer without risking meltdown now. He nodded, still working to catch his breath. No problem. Inside, his mind reeled with unanswered questions. He'd known the galaxy had infinite variety, but nothing had prepared him for the raw intimacy of the Lix's conduction needs. He cleared his throat. We should rest here until we know if that comm signal got through. Maybe we can scout the station for a better coolant system. And if we run into those vibrations you sensed, we'll handle them. She stepped back fully, crossing her arms. Agreed. A faint smile tugged at her lips, making him wonder how often she let that softness break through her guarded exterior. But then, just as quickly, her expression grew serious. You said you're a salvage pilot? Are you traveling alone? His thoughts flickered to the small crew he'd left behind on a separate salvage run. I have a business partner, sort of, though we parted ways after a fight over loot. I guess I do better on my own. Humans can be complicated. She shrugged. So can my people. Then she sniffed the air, her fins fluttering with mild agitation. For now, we watch each other's backs. I suspect we'll need it. He sank onto one of the bunks, letting his exhausted body relax. The tension of the day wore on him, but the presence of this exotic, half-naked alien woman across the small cabin was impossible to ignore. She rummaged through a drawer, found a tattered blanket, and spread it on the floor. He realized she was letting him keep the bunk, perhaps an unspoken courtesy. As she lay down, her scales made a soft rustle against the thin fabric, and Rovan turned his face away, feeling heat rise to his cheeks again. Time crawled. The overhead light flickered. Rovan's mind spun with 100 questions, but exhaustion won out. He eventually drifted into a restless doze, lulled by the far-off hum of machinery and the knowledge that, for now, they had each other's uneasy alliance. When Rovan jerked awake, Velixa was crouched by the doorway, her luminous fins partially extended. Her posture was tense, eyes narrowed. He sat up, reaching for his pistol. "What is it?" She held a finger to her lips. He listened. Sure enough, there was a faint scraping sound echoing through the corridor. Then a metallic clang. Someone, or something, was moving near their room. Rovan's heart kicked into gear. He slid off the bunk as silently as possible. Velixa raised her hand, motioning him behind her, and he let her move in front. She clearly had better senses and seemed more adept at stealth. They crept toward the corridor. Rovan pressed his ear to the door. The scraping grew louder, then faded. Slowly, he twisted the handle. The corridor lights had dimmed even more, barely illuminating the dust. They stepped out, footsteps soft. A sudden metallic scraping behind them made Rovan whirl. He caught sight of a small, scuttling security drone, its single red optic flickering in the gloom. It let out a grinding beep, as if scanning them for threat. Velixa lunged, her fins flaring with a near-silent hiss. She grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and swung it. Sparks flew as the blow crushed the drone's sensor array. It emitted a dying screech before falling silent. But the echoes of that screech might carry. Rovan's breath caught. "Nice reflexes," he muttered. She nodded, tossing the broken pipe aside. "But if there are more of these, we should be ready for trouble." As if on cue, distant beeps and clangs started up from somewhere deeper in the station. Rovan cursed under his breath. The station's automated security system must have partially rebooted, registering them as intruders. "We need to see if that console can still broadcast. If we can't get a rescue, we're stuck fighting ancient drones for who knows how long." He motioned for Velixa to follow. But the moment they rounded the bend, 3 more drones wheeled into view, small but bristling with crackling stun prods. Velixa exhaled sharply. Rovan fired his pistol at the nearest drone, shorting out its main circuit. Another shot rang out, but the second drone dodged, skittering behind a twisted girder. Velixa dived forward with serpentine grace, slamming a knee into the third drone. It spun across the corridor, shorting out. The second drone advanced, sending a jolt of electric discharge that grazed her arm. She hissed in pain. Rovan took aim, heart pounding, but the drone scuttled behind cover again. As it peeked out, Rovan squeezed the trigger. A bright flash lit the corridor, and the drone exploded into sparks. The corridor went quiet again. Velixa panted, pressing a hand to her arm. "We have to disable the entire system or it will keep sending these. Do you know how?" He glanced around, scanning the overhead signage. "Security core should be behind that sealed door in the central deck. We can override it from there." She nodded, jaw set in determination. "Then let us hurry. The station is not stable, and I doubt it can handle too much more power surging through archaic circuits." She glanced at the burn on her arm, glowing faintly. "First, I might need conduction again." Her voice was both resolute and a touch uneasy. Rovan's cheeks flared. "Right now?" She looked away, though he could tell it cost her pride. "The stun jolt heightened my body's temperature. It's spiking fast, and I can't risk losing consciousness mid-fight. Her eyes flicked to him. If we run or fight further in this state, it could be lethal for me. He swallowed, shifting from foot to foot. Adrenaline coursed through him, but they didn't exactly have time for a leisurely cuddle. Then let's make it fast. Come on. He motioned to an alcove behind some crates, out of sight from the main corridor. They stepped over debris, hunkering down in the cramped space. Rovan set his pistol aside and pulled off his torn jacket, revealing a sweat-drenched t-shirt beneath. I guess I'm plenty sweaty. He joked with forced bravado, ignoring the flutter in his chest. Velixa gave a short nod, her luminous gaze flicking over him. Sweat is helpful, actually. She pressed herself flush against him, sliding her arms around his back. He inhaled sharply. Her skin was scorching, her scaled ridges trembling with the same tension he felt roiling in his own veins. She let out a low, almost pained moan as the conduction process began. He could feel the heat draining from her body, or rather, diffusing into his. Even in the urgency of the moment, the sensation was electric. She was trembling, not from fear but from the intensity of the heat exchange. Her face was buried against his neck, breath hot against his ear. He clutched her in return, biting back a gasp at the closeness. Her chest pressed to his, and he felt every nuance of her alien physiology, the ridges, the sleek scales, the subtle hum of her rapid pulse. Slowly, the scalding warmth in her body started to even out, leaving him drenched in fresh sweat. His own heart hammered. She let out a stuttering exhale, body going slack as the immediate crisis of her overheating subsided. She pulled back, eyes heavy-lidded but more coherent. Thank you? She managed, voice barely above a whisper. She brushed her fins across his cheek almost affectionately, then drew away. The abrupt loss of contact left him oddly unbalanced. I can move now without risking meltdown. He offered a shaky nod, grabbing his pistol again. Then let's move. We can process this weirdness later. Right now, we've got to disable that security core. She tossed him a look, some combination of gratitude and tension, and fell in step behind him. They raced down the corridor, guided only by half-flickering signage. Twice more they heard drones skittering in parallel passages, but they managed to avoid direct confrontation by ducking behind collapsed bulkheads. Adrenaline thrummed in Rovan's ears. He found himself hyper-aware of Elixa's presence, the faint glow from her fins lighting their way in the near-dark. Occasionally, her hand brushed his, sending a jolt of memory back to the intense closeness they'd just shared. At last, they arrived at a heavily sealed door with a fading label, Security Core. Rovan tried the manual override, but it was jammed. There's an electronic lock, he muttered. I can try bypassing, but watch my back. Velixa pressed her ear to the metal. I sense movement inside, machinery whirring. She drew a short, curved blade from somewhere behind her minimal covering. Rovan wasn't sure how she hid it, but he was grateful she'd come armed. He tugged a loose wiring panel from the wall, crossing a few leads to trick the lock. Sparks flew, and the door groaned, sliding open by a fraction. Enough for Velixa to wedge her blade in and pry. Metal screamed in protest, but eventually they forced it open enough to slip through. Inside, the security core was a cramped chamber dominated by a large central terminal flanked by two mechanical arms that presumably fed data to various drones. A flickering holodisplay overhead showed multiple camera feeds from around the station, each feed glitching. A pair of smaller drones hovered near the terminal, scanning data. Rovan signaled for silence. Velixa nodded, creeping forward. Before the drones could react, she leaped with agile precision, severing a sensor array with her blade. Sparks showered. The second drone spun, letting out an alarm. Rovan took aim and fired, the shot clipping its anti-grav engine. It crashed to the floor in a mess of shattered plating. The chamber went quiet except for the hum of the main terminal. Let's see if we can shut down the entire drone program, Rovan said. He hurried to the terminal, stepping over the smoking remains of the drones. The system's interface was archaic, but salvageable. A row of flickering buttons indicated the security subroutines. If I can just... Suddenly the overhead panel crackled, and a synthesized voice blared from speakers. Intruders detected in core. Automated defense enabling. Rovan cursed, hands flying across the terminal. The mechanical arms on either side of him jerked to life, pivoting as if to scan for targets. Velixa lunged, trying to slice at one arm with her blade, but a shielded plating deflected her blow. "We don't have much time!" Rovan shouted, heart pounding. He typed in an override command, but the system demanded an authentication code. He tried a random passkey, but was denied. The arms whirred, one of them raising a small turret that began charging with a shrill whine. Velixa hissed, rolling behind a console for cover. "Keep it busy!" Rovan yelled, frantically tapping more commands. He spliced a few lines, pulling up the station's old log. "Damn it, it's all corrupted!" The turret fired a burst of crackling energy that slammed into the floor near Rovan's feet, leaving a smoking crater. He bit back panic, trying another approach. "I'll try a direct hardware bypass," he called to Velixa. She nodded, bracing herself. The turret tracked her, aiming. She flipped backward, her fins trailing luminous arcs. Another blast scorched the console where she'd stood. Rovan seized the open wiring panel and yanked a pair of cables free. Sparks flew, and the security system sizzled. The arms ground to a halt. The overhead voice crackled, stuttered, and cut off entirely. Silence followed except for the faint hum of the station's life support. Velixa slowly straightened, scanning for additional threats. Nothing moved. "You did it," she said, exhaling. He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Security's offline. That should handle the drones, hopefully." He took a shaky breath, glancing at her. "You all right?" She held her arm where the stunned burn had left a charred patch. "I'll manage. My species heals quickly." Still, she frowned. "But this stress on my body is intense. That conduction you provided may not last. I might need another attempt soon." Rovan's pulse spiked again at the memory. "Right. Let's see if there's a med kit or something we can find for you in here. Then we can check the comm console again." They rummaged through the security core's storage compartments. Most were empty, but they found a small emergency kit with disinfectant, bandages, and a few ancient coolant canisters. Velixa tried one canister, but it hissed uselessly, its contents long evaporated. Frustration etched her features, though she tried to remain stoic. She did allow Rovan to apply disinfectant to her burn, wincing only slightly. His fingertips brushed her scaled arm, and once again he felt that wave of awareness. She looked at him thoughtfully but said nothing, only gave a brief nod of thanks. With the security system down, the station was eerily silent. They backtracked to the command center, stepping over the remains of destroyed drones. Lights flickered overhead, but at least no new mechanical horrors emerged. When they reached the battered console that Rovan had earlier activated, he found the comm feed still sending out a short-range signal. No replies. He felt a knot of disappointment. "We might not get an answer in time," he muttered. "If we do, it might be slavers or pirates, for all we know." Velix's expression was guarded. "I can't wait forever. My ship's life support is failing. If it goes, I have nowhere to regulate my body's needs." She paused, gaze slipping to him. "I might have to rely on conduction, more often." The corners of her mouth tightened, as if she hated admitting vulnerability. He nodded, refusing to let his awkwardness show. "I told you I'd help." His mind reeled at the new reality. Sharing body heat with an alien woman was not how he'd pictured spending his day, but here they were. He adjusted a few more console settings, then made a decision. "We could attempt a spacewalk to see if we can fix your ship's coolant system. If your docking bay is accessible, maybe I can patch it up. I'm a half-decent mechanic." Her eyes lit with cautious hope. "That might work. My people's technology is advanced, but the concept is the same: coolant lines, conduction pumps. If we can repair it, I won't have to keep." She trailed off, clearly uncertain how to phrase the physical contact scenario that hovered between them. Rovan offered a slight shrug. "I'm not complaining. Just let's do what it takes to survive, yeah? She gave a curt nod and turned to pick through a pile of twisted metal. My docking bay is near the upper ring. We'll have to climb the station's maintenance shaft to get there. The lifts are offline. His stomach sank at the thought of scaling a maintenance shaft full of ancient rust and potential hazards, but he tried to keep a brave face. Lead the way. I'll follow. On they went, winding through corridors, guided by Velixa's memory of which direction led to the docking area. The flickers of her fins helped light the path when overhead lamps failed. Occasionally she would pause, pressing a hand to a wall, letting the metal's cooler temperature seep through her palm. Each time, she seemed to gather the resolve to keep moving. Rovan trailed behind, scanning for threats and trying not to dwell on how easily she'd pressed herself against him earlier. The forced intimacy lingered in his mind in a way he couldn't quite banish. At last, they reached a tall maintenance shaft. The vertical tunnel rose multiple decks, dotted with broken rungs and half-crumbled metal scaffolding. Dim emergency lights glowed in intervals along the ladder, enough to see that it was a precarious climb. Rovan whistled low. We really going up there? Velixa tested the nearest rung. It held her weight. It's stable enough if we're careful. She flicked her gaze down to Rovan's battered jacket and boots. Try not to slip. Then she grabbed the rung and began climbing. He shook his head, muttering to himself about the risk, but followed. Inch by inch, they ascended. Occasionally a rung snapped underfoot, sending a heart-stopping clang echoing up and down the shaft. They'd freeze, waiting to see if the entire structure would collapse. So far it held. About halfway up, Rovan's arms burned, and sweat soaked his shirt. Above, Velixa moved with fluid grace, but even she was breathing hard. He forced himself not to stare at her from below, though glimpses of her toned legs and shimmering scales kept intruding on his thoughts. The claustrophobic shaft pressed in, the air stale and heavy. After an eternity of climbing, they reached a ledge leading into the upper deck. Velixa heaved herself onto the platform, then turned to offer Rovan a hand. He accepted, his muscles quivering with fatigue. She pulled him up, the strength in her slender arms surprising as she helped him onto the ledge. They collapsed in a heap, panting. Velixa's shoulder brushed his as she caught her breath. We're close, she murmured, eyes fluttering. My docking bay is on the far side of this deck. Then her fins flared in agitation, and she winced, pressing a hand to her chest. Her body language told him the story. The climb had overheated her again. He started to speak, but she was already reaching for him, swallowing her pride. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice a bit ragged. The climb, it was too much. He dipped his head in a nod, pushing away embarrassment. Let's just get it over with. He pulled off his jacket, then tentatively reached for her. She leaned in, her half-bare torso sliding against him. His breath caught at the contact. The intensity of her heat exchange soared, as if her entire body was pulsating with pent-up warmth. She let out a low hiss, burying her face in the crook of his neck. Rovan's heart pounded, an odd mixture of concern, desire, and the necessity of survival. The corridor around them was quiet, though occasionally lights flickered. For a few moments, they were locked together in that intimate embrace, her arms around his back, his hands pressed to the small of hers, feeling the ripple of muscle under luminescent scales. Her breast shuddered as she finally cooled. Then she eased back, not meeting his gaze at first, as if shame and relief wrestled in her expression. Thank you, she said quietly. Without you, I wouldn't make it through this station. He swallowed. Yeah, I guess we're in this together. He took a moment to steady himself. She seemed to be thinking the same thing, for she lingered a fraction of a second too long before standing. Then, with a renewed sense of purpose, they moved on. The corridor leading to her docking bay was in better shape than the rest. Some overhead lights worked, and the metal wasn't as corroded. Velixa pointed to a large door at the end of the hall. Behind that, she said. I can't guarantee the state of my ship, but if we can fix its coolant system, we might get out of here. Rovan approached the door's control panel. It blinked red. Looks like it's sealed from the inside. Probably locked down when the station went offline. He glanced at Velixa. Any chance you can override it from your side? She hesitated. Let me see. She stepped up, placing her palm on a small sensor that was just above the main console. The alien script glowed faintly beneath her hand. She closed her eyes, the fins at her temples flickering. Then there was a chime, and the door hissed, sliding open halfway. Enough for them to squeeze through. Inside was a compact docking bay. One side showed a transparent force field holding out the vacuum of space. Velix's ship rested on the floor, sleek and organic in design, as though grown from some living material. But it bore scorch marks, and one side was riddled with holes. Stray wires and tubes dangled from a half-open hatch. The overhead lighting was stable here, though tinted with an eerie green hue. Velix's expression tightened at the sight of the damage. She moved forward, laying a hand on the hull. My poor vessel, she murmured, sounding genuinely grieved. Rovan circled around the craft, mentally cataloging the various broken segments. The coolant system lines near the tail section were severed, fluid long drained. A large chunk of the outer plating had peeled back from what looked like a direct hit. He pressed his lips into a thin line. I can try to patch the lines, but we'll need a new coolant supply. The station's reserves might be gone. Unless there's a maintenance closet around here. Velixa nodded. Over there. She pointed to a sealed compartment labeled in an alien script. I stored extra coolant canisters. But the system may have auto-vented them when we took fire. They moved over to the compartment. Rovan pried it open. Inside, he found half a dozen canisters, but 5 were empty. One still weighed something. He lifted it gingerly, giving it a little shake. A faint slosh inside. We have a little bit left, he said. Might be enough to fill your lines halfway, if we do a partial fix. Velixa exhaled in relief, though her shoulders were still tense. Let's do it. Then we can see if the ship's engines can be coaxed to life. Even partial life support would help me maintain safe temperature without constant contact. Rovan nodded, ignoring a small pang of regret he didn't want to examine too closely. I'll handle the patching. I'll need your help interpreting the system. Your tech is. He gestured at the fluid, organic lines woven throughout the hull. Kind of beyond me. You can show me what each part does. Together they knelt beneath the ship's tail section, tools scattered around them as Rovan pried open a panel and Velixa pointed to various components. The lines were flexible, coated in something that seemed part metal, part living fiber. She explained in hushed tones how her people's vessels integrated certain bioengineered aspects to better regulate temperature in space. Rovan did his best to follow, improvising patches with metal scraps and sealant from a leftover salvage kit. At one point, Velixa pressed close to see what he was doing, and he caught a whiff of her electric scent, reminding him of all that had happened. He tried to ignore the lingering tension that came from being so near, from remembering the feel of her body pressed against his. For her part, she seemed focused on the task, though he occasionally caught her gaze flicking to him with that guarded curiosity. Hours passed in sweaty labor. They replaced segments of coolant tubing, reconnected a small manifold, and attached the partial coolant canister. When Rovan finally tightened the last seal, he wiped his brow with a forearm. Okay, he panted. Now let's see if it holds. Velixa nodded, climbing into the small cockpit. The craft was roomy enough for one or two, though it was clearly designed around her species' unique shape. She pressed a series of luminescent controls. A dull hum ran through the ship's frame. Rovan watched from outside as the lines glowed faintly with circulated coolant. A hiss, followed by a trickle from a small, unsealed section. Rovan quickly grabbed a patch kit. Hold on! He sealed the leak, cursing under his breath. A few moments later, the hiss died away, and the lines glowed steadily. Rovan exhaled, relief washing through him. That should do it. Velixa emerged from the cockpit with a faint smile. It's working, partially. I can feel the temperature stabilizing already. The ship's AI says life support is at minimal capacity, but functional. Enough for me to stay inside without overheating. Rovan's exhaustion was catching up with him. That's good news. Now we just have to see if we can fly out of here? Her face fell. The engines are still offline. That damage was too severe. I don't have the parts for a full repair. She paused, eyes flicking to him. I'm stuck here unless we can figure something else out. But at least I can survive inside for a while. Maybe your comm signal will bring help. He gazed at the battered hull, heart heavy. And I don't have a ship at all. My life pod is worthless. So, guess we're both stuck. He tried a weary half-smile. Hope we like each other's company. Velixa studied him. You have done much for me. I appreciate it, truly. Her expression shifted, a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. She opened her mouth as if to say more, but a sudden beep from her cockpit drew her attention. She darted back inside, scanning readouts. The station's external sensors are picking up a vessel, she called. I can't identify it from here. The sensor system is too damaged. But it's approaching. Rovan felt a jolt of hope laced with fear. Could be a rescue, or it could be pirates or slavers. He hurried to peer over her shoulder. The display was fuzzy, lines of static running across a silhouette of a small craft approaching the station's orbit. We have to see who it is. Velixa pressed a few controls, trying to hail them. The comm system crackled. She repeated a short greeting in her language, then switched to a halting approximation of the human trade tongue. Static. Then a voice broke through, faint and choppy, but undeniably aggressive. Unidentified craft, power down. Prepare to be boarded. We are retrieving all salvage rights from the Terramite station. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. Rovan tensed. That's a pirate code. Retrieving salvage rights is what slavers say when they plan to strip the place of anything valuable, or anyone. A chill ran down his spine, remembering the stories. Slavers would arrive, capture survivors, and turn them into profit. Or worse. He glanced at Velixa, who looked equally alarmed. We can't just wait around to be boarded. We have to hide. Velixa shut off the cockpit's external broadcasts to avoid detection. If they've locked onto my ship's signature, they know someone's here. The question is, where do we hide? The station is massive, but their scanning tech is likely advanced. Rovan gritted his teeth. We might be able to use the station's geometry to our advantage. Certain areas could block scans if they're made of the right materials. The reactor core, for instance, might create sensor interference. He rubbed his face, feeling the weight of exhaustion. But it's a risk. They might systematically sweep every deck. Velix's face hardened. Then we fight. Or we sabotage their boarding. She paused, her luminous eyes flicking with anger. I will not be enslaved. I know what that life is. My people have been captured before. I'd rather die. Her intensity sparked something in him. I'm with you, he said. But we need a plan. Let's see if we can funnel them into a choke point. Maybe blow the corridor behind them. We could do it near the security core. That place is rigged with some old defenses we might re-enable in a hurry. Velixa's lips twitched in what almost looked like a grin. You're cunning. Let's do it. She hopped out of the ship, grabbing whatever gear might be useful, including her blade and a small toolkit. Rovan followed, trying to ignore the ache in his limbs. The station's stale corridors seemed even more ominous now, with the threat of slavers inbound. They made haste to the security core, stepping around debris. Rovan's mind spun with possible sabotage methods. We could rig a chain reaction in the corridor walls, he said. If we time it right, we can trap them or blast them into vacuum. Velixa studied the corridor near the core. This plating is old but thick. Let's see if we can lure them in. We can show a false signal, like we're holed up in that side corridor, then blow the bulkhead behind them. She knelt near a wiring bundle, fiddling with it. I can handle the decoy signal if you can set the explosive trigger. Rovan scratched the back of his neck, glancing around for anything that might work as a bomb. He spotted a pressurized canister in a storage crate, labeled as an industrial propellant. This might do the trick if we rig it with the station's power couplings. The spark should be enough to blow the canister. Velixa nodded firmly. Let's do it quickly. We have no idea how long before they board. She took the canister while Rovan spliced wires from the security console. The overhead lights flickered ominously. He worked feverishly, connecting a makeshift detonator. Velixa used the console to broadcast a short-range beacon from the corridor, making it look like that was the best place to find survivors. That should draw them in, she said. Then we blow it. Rovan swallowed, adrenaline coursing. We should get to cover. Let's head back to the living quarters near the command center. We can hide behind the thick walls. Once they show up, we can listen from the console's feed. Velixa agreed. They hurried to the command center, setting up a vantage point behind piles of debris. The console still flickered with static images. Through the partial camera feed, they watched as a small craft docked at one of the station's exterior bays. 6 lifeforms disembarked, humanoid shapes, heavily armed. Slavers. Rovan's stomach twisted at the sight of them stalking the halls, scanning for loot. He could almost feel Velixa's fear and anger radiating beside him. She whispered. They're approaching. I see their path on the feed. Your trap corridor is next. Her fins flared with tension. They're about to step right into it. Rovan clenched his teeth, finger hovering over the makeshift detonator switch. The slavers advanced, methodically searching rooms. Come on, he muttered. A little closer. Sweat dripped down his temple. He felt Velixa's hand lightly touch his shoulder, a steadying presence. He risked a glance at her. She looked resolute, her luminous eyes fixed on the screen. The tension between them had shifted into a singular focus: survival. On the screen, the slavers entered the corridor. Rovan caught his breath, waiting for them to get well inside. They paused, scanning the area. One pointed a scanning device at the far end. They moved in deeper. No, Velixa breathed. Rovan pressed the detonator. The feed whited out for a split second as an explosion rocked the corridor. The cameras flickered violently, showing the corridor filling with debris. 2 slavers were hurled backward by the blast. The hull plating buckled. A portion of the station's outer wall tore open, venting atmosphere in a rush. The remaining slavers were sucked into the gap, howling in terror. The feed went dark. Both Rovan and Velixa sagged, relief colliding with horror. The station's hull breach alarm whined in the distance, but the decks they occupied still had integrity. Rovan exhaled unsteadily. We did it. They should be out of the picture now. Velixa's eyes glistened with a complex mix of triumph and sorrow. It had to be done. But life is life. I hate that it came to that. He nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. It was them or us. The alarm continued, though faintly. We should probably check if there are any survivors or stragglers. He keyed the console, but the cameras for that corridor were offline. He switched to another vantage, showing the slaver craft in the docking bay. No one was there, but the ramp was still extended. We might have just scored ourselves a ticket off this station, Rovan realized. If that ship is intact. Velixa's expression lit with cautious hope. If we can pilot it. I'm not familiar with human or termite designs, but you are. He nodded, excitement rising. You said you'd rather not remain here. That might be our best chance. Let's check it out. They hurried through the corridors again, exhaustion dogging their every step. Rovan led the way to the docking bay where the slaver's small craft was attached, a menacing black hull with spikes along its flanks. The cargo ramp was down. They advanced carefully, pulse weapons at the ready. The interior was ominously quiet. No sign of the slavers, presumably killed in the explosion or sucked out into space. A wave of relief washed through them as they confirmed the ship was empty. Rovan made a quick inspection of the cockpit. This is definitely not a standard design, but I can figure it out. Basic sublight engines, a NAV console, and a jump drive if we're lucky. We might have to hack the onboard security, though. He lowered himself into the pilot's seat, grimacing at the spikes and chains decorating it in macabre style. Slavers are a twisted bunch. Velixa stood by the doorway, scanning the corridors for any sign of movement. Any chance we can detach immediately? Yeah, he murmured, flipping a few switches, bypassing the craft's lockouts. The ship hummed to life, though there was a strained rattle in the engines. They took damage docking in a busted station, but it should still fly. Let me just. A sudden hiss made them both freeze. From a side compartment, a hulking figure emerged, covered in battered armor. A slaver that had survived. He wielded a large energy rifle, glowing with lethal charge. In an instant he fired. Velixa dove behind a crate. Rovan ducked behind the pilot's chair. The shot blew a chunk out of the cockpit console. Alarm shrieked. There's one left! Rovan shouted, cursing under his breath. Velixa hissed from behind the crate. I can't see a clear shot. The angle's too tight. We have to flank him. Rovan grit his teeth, scanning for an alternate route. He spotted a narrow access corridor that looped around behind the cockpit. I'll draw his fire, you go around, he suggested. Velixa nodded, creeping out of view. Rovan glanced over the seat, firing a blind shot at the slaver. The slaver roared, returning fire. The cockpit's instruments sparked and exploded in a shower of debris. Rovan yelped, covering his face. Another volley whizzed overhead, sizzling the air. The entire ship rattled. A flash of motion behind the slaver, Velixa emerged, blade in hand. She lunged, but at the last second, he turned. He swung his rifle but into her midsection with bone-jarring force, sending her sprawling. Rovan snarled in panic and emptied several blasts from his pistol. One shot slammed into the slaver's shoulder. He snarled, staggering, but swung the rifle toward Rovan. At that moment, Velixa recovered, rolling to her feet despite the pain. She drove her blade into a vulnerable gap in the slaver's armor. A choked gurgle escaped him before he toppled, the rifle clattering to the deck. Velixa fell to her knees, panting, her scales dull and her fins trembling with strain. Rovan rushed over, checking her. You okay? He saw bruises forming where the rifles butt had struck. She winced, nodding through clenched teeth. I'll live. He helped her stand, and she leaned on him for a moment, breath uneven. He could feel her radiating heat. Another near meltdown from the exertion. We have to finish launching, she gasped. Then I can rest. He guided her to the co-pilot's seat, or what passed for one in this twisted cockpit. He slid back into the pilot's chair, ignoring the destroyed portion of the console. I can still manage minimal flight, he muttered, hot-wiring power through an auxiliary panel. Okay, hold on. The engines roared, the docking clamps groaned. The ship lurched upward, then slid free of the station with a grinding protest. The force field parted for them. Suddenly they were drifting in open space, the battered Terramite station looming behind them. We're out, Rovan breathed, heart pounding. Let's see if the short-range thrusters can get us away from the station's gravity well. Velixa sagged against the seat, eyes closed. I need conduction, she whispered, her voice taut with pain. But not here. I can't risk you losing focus on the controls. He cast a worried glance at her. We might be okay to slip into a stable orbit for a moment. Then I can help you. He found the autopilot function, naturally, locked behind a code. He cursed, inputting a few overrides. The panel beeped in error. Another beep. Finally, the autopilot engaged in a limited capacity. The ship steadied, holding a slow drift away from the station. Rovan turned to Velixa, swallowing a surge of concern. She was trembling, sweat beading on her scaled brow. All right, he said softly. Come here. She let out a shaky breath, but her eyes were grateful. Don't let me burn you. He shook his head. I trust you. He undid his seat straps, then gently coaxed her onto his lap, arms around her back as she curled into his chest. She was scorching, almost beyond what she'd been before. He cringed at the sudden onslaught of heat, but she quickly modulated it, letting the conduction happen in pulses. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and she buried her face against his shoulder, as if hiding from the pain. Rovan pressed a hand to her hair, feeling the ridges along her scalp, the smooth scales. Slowly, her shuddering eased. He felt his own temperature rise, sweat trickling down his neck, but it was bearable. More than bearable, it was strangely intimate, that he could help her in such a raw, physical way. As her body stabilized, she relaxed in his arms, her eyes half closed. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice muffled against his chest. "I owe you my life many times over." He managed a tight laugh. "We'll call it even. You saved me from the slaver, after all." In the hush of the cockpit, with only the hum of the engines around them, Rovan felt his heart pounding in a way that had little to do with fear. Velixa stirred, lifting her head to look at him. Their gazes locked, and he saw something raw and unguarded in her eyes. He felt a sudden urge to kiss her, a compulsion fueled by adrenaline and closeness. He hesitated, unsure if that would be welcome or offensive. Velixa seemed to sense it. She studied his face, breathing still uneven. Then her gaze dropped to his lips, and her fins fluttered with a tremor of decision. Very gently she closed the distance, pressing her mouth to his in a soft, tentative brush of lips. It was warm, no, hot, and delicate, her breath tinged with that electric scent. Rovan's chest went tight. He slowly leaned into the kiss, heart thundering. The moment felt suspended in time, a fragile connection formed in the quiet aftermath of violence and survival. They broke apart after a breathless moment, either sure what to say. Velixa's cheeks, though scaled, seemed to flush slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "My people, conduction can be very intimate. I let my emotions get the better of me." Rovan swallowed, gently cupping her cheek. "You don't have to apologize." He faltered, not sure how to put this swirling rush of feeling into words. "I'm glad you did." A faint smile lit her eyes, and for a second the tension eased between them. They were no longer strangers forced into contact by necessity, but something more. A beep from the console interrupted, reminding them of their precarious situation. Rovan exhaled, setting Velixa gently in the co-pilot seat. "We should figure out a next move. This ship's jump drive might be functional. If we can fix that console you shot out, we might actually get somewhere safer." Velixa nodded, collecting herself. "Let's see. My star charts are, well, you might have to rely on your own navigation. We need a safe harbor. A place with minimal hostility toward unknown species." He scratched his chin. "I know a free port a few systems from here. They're not exactly a paradise, but they won't shoot us on sight. Maybe we can find more coolant, or even someone who can fix your ship if you want to keep it." He paused. "Or we can just keep the slaver vessel if that's easier." She frowned, her expression pained as she glanced out at her own damaged ship, still docked in the station's bay. "My vessel is special to me. But maybe I must leave it behind. Without the correct parts, it's useless. If we survive, I can return for it eventually." He squeezed her hand, ignoring how natural it felt. "We'll figure it out." He got up to rummage through the small cargo hold behind the cockpit, hoping to find something to fix the damaged console. Tools, wires, maybe even a backup monitor. Velixa followed, scanning crates. As they worked side by side, that earlier kiss lingered in the air between them like a charged memory neither could dismiss. At last, they found some components. Over the next hour, they painstakingly replaced the shattered console sections. Velixa, despite her lack of familiarity with this brand of technology, had keen eyes and nimble fingers. She quickly learned from Rovan's explanations, and together they got the NAV system booted up. The jump drive readouts flickered to life. "We have partial functionality," Rovan said. "We might be able to do a short jump out of here." Velixa's expression was determined. "Let's do it." The station was a death trap. The next place we land might be the same, but perhaps we'll have better odds this time. He input coordinates for the nearest jump gate that led to the free port he'd mentioned. The console beeped with a caution. The drive was unstable, might not hold. Rovan's jaw tightened. "We have no choice. Either stay here and drift until more pirates or slavers show up, or risk the jump." Velixa nodded, taking a seat. Rovan strapped in beside her, double-checking the harness. Tension crackled in the enclosed cockpit. He initiated the jump sequence, a loud whir building beneath the deck. The slaver's ship began to vibrate ominously. Outside the forward viewport, the stars blurred slightly, a swirl of cosmic distortion. Rovan held his breath as the ship lurched, an audible groan echoing through its frame. Then, with a flash of swirling lights, they shot forward into the swirling corridor of FTL's slipstream. For a moment, everything was chaos, colors swirling outside, the hull shaking as if it might tear apart. Felix's hand found his, gripping tight. He squeezed back, sharing the terror and the strange exhilaration. If the ship survived, they'd be beyond the station, beyond the immediate threat. If it didn't, well, at least they wouldn't die alone. The swirling tunnel lasted longer than Rovan expected, each second stretching in breathless anticipation. Then, with a final jolt, the cockpit windows cleared to reveal open space dotted with distant stars. They'd made it. Rovan almost let out a delirious laugh. That's the star cluster near the free port. The NAV says we're only a few hours away at sublight. Relief whooshed through him. Felix's shoulders slumped, her face betraying weariness. She gave a small, genuine smile. Thank you, Rovan. She parted her lips as if to say more, then let it fade. Instead, she slowly unbuckled and stood on shaky legs. I'm going to see if there's a bunk or somewhere to rest. My body is battered. He nodded, feeling exhaustion in every fiber of his being as well. I'll set us on autopilot. We should be safe in this region. He keyed in the course. The battered slaver vessel rumbled, but the readouts indicated it would hold. Then he followed her through a narrow doorway to a small cabin that probably served as the crew's sleeping quarters. It was Spartan, just a metal bunk with suspicious stains and a flickering overhead light. The stench of sweat and stale air hung in the cramped space. Felix's face wrinkled with distaste. Disgusting. But it'll have to do. She sank onto the bunk with a small wince. Rovan hovered near the door, unsure. She glanced up at him, luminous eyes searching his. Will you stay? I don't want to be alone right now. His heart softened. He nodded, stepping in, letting the door slide shut behind him. He sank down beside her on the bunk, the metal creaking beneath them. For a long moment neither spoke. The exhaustion, the violence, and the intensity of their forced intimacy weighed on them. Finally, Velixa leaned her head on his shoulder, and he rested a hand on her scaled thigh. They sat like that, quiet, comforting in shared presence. You asked earlier if I had a crew, she murmured. I did once. Slavers like these killed most of them, forced me to flee in my damaged ship. I've been alone, drifting from place to place, trying to survive. Rovan closed his eyes, a pang of empathy tugging at him. I'm sorry. He hesitated, then added softly. I'm a bit of a stray myself, I guess. Been drifting alone longer than I'd care to admit. Seems we found each other at just the right time. She tilted her head, regarding him with a gentleness he hadn't seen before. Yes. Fate, coincidence, or random cruelty. I'm not sure which. But you saved me, again and again. I'll not forget that. Something in her tone made his breath catch. Slowly, almost shyly, she lifted her hand to cradle his cheek. Your body heat saved my life. Now, let me at least offer you comfort. Her mouth hovered near his, uncertain. Rovan felt the stir of desire rising, tempered by emotional weight. When he finally leaned forward, her lips met his, a slow, lingering kiss that spoke of exhaustion, relief, and a cautious spark of deeper feeling. One kiss folded into another, heat building between them, though this time not from her meltdown. The bed creaked as she shifted, pressing closer, her scaled body pliant and warm. Rovan's hands slid along her sides, marveling at the texture of her luminous skin, the slight ridges that gave her an otherworldly shape. She let out a quiet sound as she deepened the contact, her breath tasting of adrenaline and unspoken longing. Their shared tension and near-death experiences ignited a raw urgency. Clothing was already minimal for her, but for him it was a slow shedding of layers, a series of tentative touches and half-whispered reassurances. She guided his hand to the edges of her minimal cloth. "Here," she murmured, voice trembling. "I trust you." He gently eased it aside, exposing more of her shimmering form. She pressed against him, conduction a swirling dance of warmth and shared sensation. He found himself half dazed at the alien curves, the subtle patterns that glowed softly under his touch. She exhaled, arching into him, encouraging more closeness. Their lips met again, hearts pounding in tandem. The bunk's metal rails groaned, the overhead light flickered, but they were lost to the moment's intensity. Sweat beaded on Rovin's brow as her heat mingled with his, no longer a forced conduction but a mutual exchange of trembling desire. His heartbeat thudded, raw and visceral, and her scaled thighs slid around his waist. She pressed her mouth to his ear, exhaling in a low, breathy moan as she let him explore. The sensations were heady, a swirl of sweaty human skin and luminous scales, colliding in an improbable bond. For both of them, it seemed to be a frantic attempt to reclaim life after the jaws of death had snapped so close. Gradually, the frantic edge softened. Their movements found a languid rhythm. He discovered that certain ridges on her body elicited quiet gasps when stroked, and she learned that sliding her warm fins across the small of his back sent a shiver of pleasure up his spine. Time blurred. In the background, the hum of the ship's engines and the soft beep of a console left them only half aware of the precarious reality outside this cabin. Here, for a fleeting stretch, they were locked in a bubble of stolen intimacy. Eventually, they lay entwined, breathing shallow but content. Velixa's hand rested on Rovin's chest, her fins fluttering with aftershocks. She stared at him with wide, unguarded eyes. He brushed a thumb across her cheek, feeling the fine scales. "That was unexpected," he murmured, voice rough. Her lips curved in a tired smile. "We are both starved for connection. My people see conduction as deeply emotional, beyond mere biology. You have given me so much. It is only fair I share in this closeness." Then she trailed a finger over his collarbone. "We have a lot to figure out." He nodded, a surge of complicated feelings swirling in him. "Yeah. A lot." He kissed her lightly on the forehead, then stared at the grimy ceiling. "But we'll have time. Let's get to the free port. We can decide what comes next." They dozed in and out of a light, exhausted sleep, curled against each other. Some time later, a soft ping from the cockpit roused them. Rovin reluctantly slipped from the bunk, pulling on his clothes. Velixa rose too, readying her minimal coverings, though they seemed even more disheveled now. She gave him a small, playful look before they parted ways to check the cockpit. The console indicated an incoming hail from the free port. Rovin answered in a hoarse voice, speaking with a bored-sounding dockmaster. They hammered out the fees and protocols for docking. The dockmaster sounded mostly uninterested in what kind of vessel was approaching, as long as they paid. Rovin ended the call. "We're good. We can land at Dock 17. They won't ask too many questions if we slip them a bribe." He turned to Velixa. "We can stock up on coolant for you. See if we can fix this ship or trade it for something else." She nodded thoughtfully, slipping into the co-pilot's seat. "I should stay hidden while you negotiate. My appearance might raise suspicion." The overhead lights glinted off her fins. She looked at him as if expecting him to question that logic, but Rovin just nodded in understanding. "Probably a good idea. Some of the folks at that port are more xenophobic than others." He engaged sublight thrusters, guiding the battered slaver craft toward the distant glow of a small station orbiting a dull yellow star. Out the viewport, they could see the free port looming closer, a ring of mismatched docking modules, neon signs flickering in multiple alien languages. Fleets of tiny cargo drones zipped around, ferrying goods. As Rovin maneuvered the ship into the docking clamps, his stomach twisted with nerves. So many unknowns. But at least they were away from the Terramite station's dead halls, away from immediate peril. They touched down with a clang, the docking arms gripping the hull. Rovin powered down the engines. Outside, a hiss indicated the pressurization of the docking tube. "We're here," he said softly. He glanced at Velixa, who stared at the exit with tension in her eyes. I'll go out first, settle the fees. Then I'll find some coolant. You stay in the cabin. If I can figure out a decent cover story, maybe you can slip out later to stretch your legs or help me gather supplies. She frowned, fiddling with the strap of her covering. I don't like the idea of staying hidden, but I trust your judgment. This is your territory, not mine. He forced a reassuring smile, stepping over to lay a hand on her shoulder. I won't take long. And, in case anyone boards, lock the hatch. He winked, trying to lighten the mood. We both know you can handle yourself, but I don't want any surprises. She offered a small smirk, pressing her palm over his hand. Go. Before I need conduction again. He laughed quietly, grabbed a battered satchel, and headed down the cargo ramp into the dock. The Freeport's air smelled of fuel, sweat, and questionable cooking odors. The environment was a hodgepodge of species, squat reptilians, tall insectoids, half-cybered humans. All scurried about on various errands. The neon signs overhead flickered in half a dozen alphabets. Rovan inhaled, shoulders tense. Time to do business. He found the local dock official, a greasy-haired man with augmented eyes. They haggled over the docking fees, Rovan bribing him with a few salvageable trinkets he'd pocketed from the station. The official shrugged, bored, stamping Rovan's permit. Welcome to Dock 17. Don't cause trouble, he muttered. With that done, Rovan set off to find coolant. He navigated the station's bustling corridors, stepping around hawkers and shady merchants. After an hour of searching, he found a small shop run by a wizened being with 4 arms. They specialized in exotic fluids, including thermal conduction gel. Perfect for Velix's ship. The merchant demanded a steep price. Rovan winced, but eventually parted with some valuable salvage data. He left with 3 large canisters of the gel, enough to properly fill and maintain the ship's cooling lines. Back at the dock, he carefully carried the canisters up the ramp. The hatch was locked, as instructed. He rapped on it. After a moment, it slid open, revealing Velix's tense face. She relaxed upon seeing him. You're safe. That's good. He stepped inside, sealing the hatch. I found coolant. We can fill the reserves, get this ship stable. He set the canisters down. Then maybe we can see about getting real repairs or a trade. He paused, noticing how she hovered near the cockpit, scanning the station out the viewport. Everything all right? She exhaled. No one boarded. But I keep expecting trouble. My luck hasn't exactly been great until now. She inclined her head to the canisters. Let's fill the system. They got to work, hooking the canisters to the ship's lines. The fluid glowed faintly as it coursed through the vessel's biometal infrastructure. A sense of relief flooded Velix's features as she checked readouts. Fully operational cooling now. It won't fix the engine damage, but at least I can maintain my biology without clinging to you. Her tone was neutral, but a flicker of disappointment seemed to cross her expression. Rovan swallowed, uncertain of the mix of feelings swirling inside him. We can still, if you want, conduction doesn't have to only be about survival. She hesitated, searching his face. I do want that closeness. But I also don't want you to feel obligated. My species' needs are unique, and you've already sacrificed so much. He gently took her hands, ignoring how the ridges felt both strange and familiar under his fingers. I'm not doing this out of obligation. I care about you. But yeah, we have a lot to figure out. We barely know each other. Velixa nodded. Then let us take it slowly. No more forced contact, unless it's necessary. But perhaps we choose it for other reasons. She offered a small, hopeful smile. They spent the next day patching systems and exploring the Freeport in short bursts. Rovan would go out, bargain for small engine parts, slip back, and Velixa would help him install them. Each time he returned, her face lit with relief, as if she'd half expected him not to come back. With each successful repair, the slaver's ship inched closer to being a functional vessel they could call their own, though its menacing decor remained. Over these cycles they talked more. She told him fragments of her culture, how her people valued communal conduction as a form of emotional unity. She described the bioluminescent signals along her fins, how certain patterns indicated mood or social standing. He shared stories of his life as a drifting pilot, the heartbreak that drove him to remote salvage jobs. He'd lost someone once, a partner, gone in a station accident. Guilt had kept him running ever since. That admission seemed to soften Velixa even more toward him. She placed a comforting hand on his chest, letting him sense her silent sympathy. When they locked eyes, the old ache inside him eased, replaced by the flickering potential of something new. With each moment, he found it harder to deny the quiet bond forming between them. The forced conduction had been the start, but now something deeper was taking root. On the second night, as station artificial lights dimmed to simulate a cycle, they found themselves in the bunk again. This time, it wasn't frantic or purely survival-driven. Velixa initiated a soft conduction, not because she was in meltdown, but because she wanted the closeness. They undressed more leisurely, exploring each other with hushed fascination. She traced the scars on his body, and he marveled at the patterns in her scales. Their kisses were unhurried, lips brushing with a gentleness that seemed impossible given their precarious circumstances. Heat still surged between them, driving them to a slow, sensual dance on the cramped bunk, but it was layered with the beginnings of genuine affection. Afterward, they lay tangled together, breathing softly. He stroked her hair, where the ridges met the bioluminescent lines behind her ear. She sighed contentedly, pressing closer. "It seems conduction is more pleasurable than I ever realized," she murmured in a teasing tone. He chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We're rewriting the manual on it, I think." In the comfortable silence that followed, Rovan let himself imagine a future. Not just a hasty scramble for survival, but something more stable. Maybe they could continue traveling together, find her people if she wanted or roam free if she preferred. He didn't know. For now, it was enough that they had each other. Early on the third day, the big break came. An engineer at the port approached Rovan, offering to buy the slaver's ship. The man had a twisted sense of humor and a fascination with slaver tech. He proposed a trade, a battered but functional cargo vessel, plus some extra credits, in exchange for the menacing craft. Rovan quietly conferred with Velixa. While the slaver's ship was workable, it carried too many scars, physically and emotionally. Trading it for a simpler cargo ship might be the clean slate they needed. Velixa hesitated, glancing around the cockpit where they had shared so many moments. "It served its purpose, but I will not mourn this ship," she decided. "Let's trade." They made the deal, completing the exchange in a flurry of paperwork that Rovan had to half falsify. Soon, they found themselves standing in a different docking bay, gazing at their new ship. It was a beat-up cargo hauler, wide-bodied and unremarkable, but it had a functioning jump drive and enough space to accommodate Velixa's conduction modifications if needed. The battered exterior sported a chipped paint job in neon blue, but Rovan found it oddly charming. Velixa ran a hand along the hull, testing the temperature. "This could work," she said, nodding in approval. "Can we add some biological conduction lines inside? My people have ways to integrate that, but it might be complicated." Rovan shrugged. "We'll figure it out. Let's just get the basics sorted first. We can get our stuff moved in. Then we'll plan where to go next." She agreed. They spent the next few hours hauling coolant canisters and personal belongings aboard their new home. Rovan paused now and then to admire the sight of Velixa carrying containers with surprising ease. Her minimal clothing still turned heads among the station's passers-by, but no one dared approach her with Rovan by her side. A small wave of protective instinct rose in him, though he also recognized her formidable strength. Once loaded, they retreated inside. The cargo ship's interior smelled of stale air and old grease. But the living quarters were bigger than the slaver ship's cramped bunk. 2 separate bunks, a small galley, even a half-functional shower. Velixa looked it over with a curious tilt of her head. "This is better than I expected." Rovan grinned. "We can make it home. Might need some cleaning, though." He set down a crate, then turned to Velixa, noticing how her fins glowed faintly in the subdued lighting. She caught his gaze and smiled softly, stepping closer. "We're really free now," he said, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "No slavers, no security drones, no decaying station. Just new territory." She lifted a hand to his cheek, brushing it gently. "Free, yes. Together?" His heart skipped. "If you'll have me," she answered by leaning in, pressing a tender kiss to his lips. No meltdown, no immediate threat, just the quiet promise of something deeper. They parted slowly, gazing at each other. Then Velixa cleared her throat, glancing around. "Before we depart, maybe we should stock up on actual supplies. Food, parts, enough to travel somewhere quiet to figure out our next steps." She hesitated. I'm not sure what my next steps even are. It's been so long since I had more than day-to-day survival to plan." He squeezed her hand. "Same here. Let's just see the galaxy. Drift together, at least until we find a place that feels like home. Or we can search for your people, if you want." She blinked, a swirl of emotion crossing her face. "My people, many are scattered, or enslaved. I'm not ready to face that yet. Maybe someday. For now, let's keep moving, see what we discover." She took a shaky breath. "Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Rovan said. "We'll go at your pace." "Our pace, I guess." He tapped the crate. "Let's finish storing this stuff. Then we can do a final pre-flight check and get out of here." They divided the tasks, working efficiently. Rovan was reminded of how well they functioned together under pressure. Without the immediate crisis, he realized they worked just as smoothly. Their synergy wasn't just adrenaline or forced conduction. There was a genuine rapport building. When they finally had everything stowed, Rovan led Velixa to the cockpit. The pilot's seat creaked as Rovan settled in, flicking on the power systems. Velixa stood behind him, her hands on the back of the chair, leaning over to watch him work. He keyed the engine start. The old cargo hauler rumbled to life, console lights flickering in a more or less stable manner. He pulled up the station's traffic control. "This is Vessel." He paused, looking at Velixa. "We never named it." She cocked her head. "Your human ships use names, yes? Something meaningful." Rovan rubbed his chin. "We could call it the Conduction, but that sounds weird." He chuckled. "How about the Temperance? It's got a certain ring." Velixa gave a small laugh, the sound sending warmth through him. "Temperance implies restraint. Are we so restrained?" Her eyes sparkled teasingly. "But all right. Temperance it is." He typed in the new registration details. "Dockmaster, this is the Temperance requesting departure clearance." A moment later, the channel crackled with an affirmative. The docking clamps released with a clang. Slowly, Rovan guided the ship away from the station, thrusters humming. Velixa slid into the co-pilot's seat, the overhead lights casting a soft glow over her scaled skin. They drifted into open space, the star's golden light catching the hull. For a moment, they both just stared at the vastness before them. Then Velixa turned to him, her eyes luminous. "Where to?" He typed in a star chart, picking a system known for its quiet trading routes and minimal oversight. "Somewhere calm, where we can breathe for once." Then he caught her gaze. "After that, who knows?" She smiled, placing her hand over his on the console. "That's enough for me. Let's just go. Together." His heart thudded with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He engaged the sublight engines, setting course for the system's outer jump gate. As they accelerated, the swirl of stars around them seemed to reflect the swirl of possibility in his chest. Velixa's fins fluttered, an unspoken thrill or anticipation. She reached over, tangling her fingers in his. In that simple gesture, they sealed their fragile yet growing bond. Hours slipped by as they flew. Occasionally, Velixa would tweak the coolant flow to ensure the ship didn't overheat. They swapped stories about bizarre port towns and near-death scrapes. Laughter came easier than either expected. When at last they reached the jump gate, Rovan deftly navigated them into position. A low hum reverberated through the hull as the gate locked onto their signature. Then, With a flash of parted energy, they surged forward into the slipstream once more. In the swirling corridor of warp space, the Lixa unbuckled, drifting over to Rovin's seat. He glanced at her, about to warn her about the turbulence, but her eyes were locked on him with quiet intensity. She looped her arms around his shoulders, and the sense of cosmic swirl outside faded to the background. He slid a hand along her waist, feeling the gentle shift of her scales. Conduction was no longer a matter of life or death, but an anchor, a bond. She pressed her forehead to his, lips hovering near. "We survived so many dangers so quickly," she whispered. "But I don't regret it. Not if it led me here." He kissed her softly, the roar of slip space around them, the metal seat pressing into his back. "Me neither," he said. Her fins glowed with a soft pulse, a sign of contentment he was learning to recognize. They stayed like that, locked in a delicate moment, heartbeats thudding in tandem, until the slipstream spat them back into normal space. The jump gate vanished behind them, replaced by a tranquil system of faint starlight and scattered asteroids. Rovin eased the engines to a cruising speed, scanning for potential hazards. There were no immediate threats on the sensors. He and Velixa exchanged a knowing look. "This area is fairly empty," he said. "We can hide among the asteroids if we need to. Or just explore." Velixa's eyes glowed with curiosity. "I want to see if any of these asteroids have interesting minerals. My people used to gather certain crystals for conduction amplifiers. This might be an opportunity." He nodded. "Sure. Let's do it. We can practice how we want to live, not just how to survive." The cargo hauler's thrusters angled them toward the nearest cluster of asteroids, gently weaving through the silent giants. Velixa studied sensor readouts, describing her species' interest in certain luminous crystals that formed in pockets of cosmic radiation. Rovin listened, enthralled by her knowledge. He found himself wanting to delve deeper, to learn everything about her culture. She, in turn, peppered him with questions about human salvage traditions, about how he learned to pilot in the far reaches of the galaxy. They ended up scanning a mid-sized asteroid that gave off faint energy readings. Rovin maneuvered in close, deploying a docking clamp so they could set foot on the rock's surface in low gravity. They donned environment suits from the cargo hold. Velixa's had to be modified to accommodate her fins. She insisted on minimal insulation, needing the conduction with cooler surfaces to keep from overheating in a vacuum suit. Exiting the airlock, they found themselves in the stark blackness of space, the asteroid's rocky surface stretching out before them. Stars glimmered overhead, the vacuum silent around them. They walked carefully, mag boots clamping with each step. Velixa's fins glowed faintly, capturing starlight in mesmerizing patterns. They eventually found a small fissure in the rock, using their suit lights to illuminate the interior. Sparkling crystals lined the walls, faintly luminescent. Velixa let out a soft exclamation of wonder, pointing to an outcrop of pale violet shards. She carefully chipped a sample, stowing it in a pouch. With a grin that even the suit's visor couldn't hide, she motioned for Rovin to follow deeper. He complied, feeling a strange sense of peace. No immediate threats, no lethal meltdown. Just exploration and the quiet thrill of discovering something new with her. After an hour of collecting samples, they returned to the surface, gazing out at the cargo hauler clamped to a ridge, its battered hull reflecting distant starlight. Velixa stepped close, her helmet nearly bumping his. He could see her luminous eyes shining through the visor. She reached out, pressing her gloved hand to his. Their suits touched, a new kind of conduction, less direct, but meaningful. In that moment, Rovin felt an overwhelming sense of possibility. They might be drifting at the fringes of the galaxy, but they were forging a path that belonged to them alone. When they returned to the ship, removing their suits and stowing the crystals, Velixa stared at the hull with satisfaction. These could be used for ship enhancements, or conduction amplifiers for me. Or we can just keep them to trade. Rovin brushed dust from his jumpsuit. Whatever we do it on our own terms. He hesitated, then gently cupped her chin, tilting her face to his. She responded with a soft sigh, leaning in for a kiss that carried the sweet taste of gratitude and budding love. Time passed in a haze of small adventures. They visited remote outposts, traded crystals for needed supplies, learned more about each other. Slowly, they adapted the cargo ship to better suit Felix's conduction needs, installing a specialized coolant module that let her rest without constant fear of overheating. She still craved contact with him, though, and he rarely refused. Their nights remained heated, both physically and emotionally, forging a bond that deepened with each passing day. Conflict found them occasionally: raiders who saw a vulnerable cargo ship, unscrupulous merchants who tried to cheat them, but the combination of Rovin's cunning and Felix's swift lethality kept them safe. In each scrap, their trust in each other grew stronger. Rovin noticed how she'd check on him after every confrontation, scanning him for injuries with an almost protective fervor. He, in turn, always stood by her side, never once letting her fight alone. As their trust solidified, so did their unspoken question: were they partners only by circumstance, or something more? The answer crystallized bit by bit: they were choosing this bond. Each conduction was no longer just a fix for her biology. It was a reaffirmation of connection. Each tender moment, each shared laugh or sorrow, wove them tighter together. One night, in a quiet sector bathed by the light of a giant red star, Velixa asked him to join her in the cargo bay. She had scattered a few of the crystals they'd gathered, forming a circle of faintly glowing shards. The bay's overhead lights were dimmed. She stood in the center, wearing only her minimal wrap, luminous fins shimmering in the starlight that streamed through the bay's viewport. Rovin approached, confusion and curiosity warring in him. She beckoned him closer. "In my culture, conduction is often formalized in a bonding ritual," she explained softly. "We gather glowing elements to reflect the merging of energies. You have given me your trust, your warmth, your protection. I've never asked for more than your help, but now I want to ask if you would share in something deeper. A union of sorts, not by law, but by choice." He swallowed, stepping into the circle. His breath caught at her beauty, the swirl of faint light along her arms and legs, the way her scaled skin glowed a gentle purple in the star's reflection. Yeah? I want that." The sincerity of his words made his heart pound. She took his hands, guiding them around her waist. Then she pressed her forehead to his, her fins fluttering in a slow pattern. "Then join me in conduction, not because I will perish without it, but because we want to." He felt a surge of emotion well up. He slipped off his shirt, letting the star's heat wash over his bare skin. Slowly, he pressed his body to hers, feeling that familiar exchange of temperature. But this time, it was richer, layered with the solemnity of the moment. She sighed, guiding his hands along her ridges, and he explored her glowing lines with reverence. Together, they drifted into a slow dance of closeness, lips meeting in tender kisses, breath mingling. The crystals around them reflected the ephemeral glow, turning the cargo bay into a hidden sanctuary. They sank to the deck, the intimate act unfolding in hushed, ritualistic reverence. Every whisper of skin, every soft moan, felt like a vow. No words were needed to confirm that they were bound in a way deeper than circumstance. Afterward, they lay tangled in each other's arms, the crystals glow dancing in the corners of Rovin's vision. Velixa rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "In my people's traditions, this is a pledge," she murmured. "We might not have the formal gatherings or the blessings of elders, but it's real to me. You are my partner, my warmth." He kissed the top of her head, tears stinging the corners of his eyes. "And you're mine. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm with you." They stayed there for a long time, lulled by the hum of the ship's engines. Outside, the red star glowed like an ember, a silent witness to the union. When they finally rose, they sealed the circle of crystals in a small container, symbolically preserving the moment of their bonding. As they stepped out of the cargo bay, hand in hand, the entire galaxy seemed a little more welcoming. Threats and challenges would still come, but they faced them together now, not as strangers forced by circumstance, but as two souls who had chosen each other. In the weeks that followed, they charted a new path, forging alliances with traders, exploring derelict stations for salvage, and occasionally offering aid to anyone who crossed their path in need, particularly those threatened by slavers or pirates. Word began to spread of a traveling pair in a battered cargo ship who stood up for the vulnerable. Some whispered that they were unstoppable because the alien woman never seemed to tire, never seemed to run out of heat. And in truth, Velixa never truly did, for every time she approached her threshold, Rovan was there, ready to share conduction. The deeper their emotional bond grew, the easier the exchange became, no longer awkward or forced, but a seamless merging of two beings who understood each other's vulnerabilities and strengths. They discovered new pockets of the galaxy, drifting through star lanes that few charted. Occasionally, Velixa would mention the possibility of one day returning to her homeworld, or at least finding her scattered kin. Rovan would gently assure her that they had all the time in the universe. She might ask him if he wanted to reconnect with old friends or salvage partners. He'd just shake his head, grateful to have left that lonely life behind. One evening, as they docked at a modest station near the edge of known space, Velixa lingered at the viewport, staring at the swirling cosmic dust clouds. Rovan approached from behind, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked softly. She smiled at the strange human expression. "Just thinking how far I've come from that day we met on the Terramite station. I was so desperate, so lost. Now I feel alive." She tilted her face up to his. "What do humans say?" "I'm happy." He brushed his lips across her scaled brow. "I'm happy too." For a moment, they just held each other, the memory of all they'd overcome forging a sense of profound peace. Then, with a shared laugh, they headed out to gather supplies for their next jump, each step echoing with the confidence of two travelers who'd found a home in each other. And so they ventured onward, forging new stories, discovering hidden wonders, forever dancing at the edge of cosmic possibility. In the quiet pulse of the cargo ship's engines, in the gentle press of their bodies when conduction was needed, whether for survival or for the simple delight of closeness, they carried within them the intimate proof that even across species, across lethal stations and slaver threats, love could blaze like a star and refuse to be extinguished.